The next time you're at the Dollar Tree, make sure you stop by the craft aisle and pick up a few of the canvas frames, even if you don't like to paint. Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name's Jess, and I have a bunch of ideas on how you can use these frames from the Dollar Tree to make some fun home decor. Now for most of the projects, I'll be cutting the material from the frame and just using the wood part, but don't worry, I have some ideas on how you can use that canvas material too. I'm really excited. I hope you are too. Let's get started. I love how a wreath looks hanging from an old rustic window, and so for this project I'm using 4 of the 8x10 canvases from the Dollar Tree, 1 of these floating shelves that you can also find there, but if you can't find those you could also use a scrap piece of wood and some crafter sticks. If I'm not worried about the staples showing on the back of the canvas frames, I usually just take my utility knife and I run the blade along the edges of all 4 sides of the frame and I just peel off the canvas. And then the little strips that are left where the staples are, I just use some scissors if I need to and peel the strips off. If there's any staples that are sticking up higher or raised off of the wood, then I'll use a set of pliers to peel those off just so they don't create an uneven surface along the back. After I had removed the canvas material from all 4 of the frames, I used some hot glue to glue 2 of the frames together, and I always use the Gorilla Glue sticks because I think they do a really good job on wood, and I always have those linked in the description box below. Once I had the first 2 frames glued together, then I hot glued the next set of frames together, and then I glued the 2 sets of 2 frames together to form a rectangle, so it looks like 4 panes on a window. Because I will be hanging this on the wall and hanging a wreath from the frame, I'm using the craft sticks along the seams in the back just to reinforce everything and make it a little stronger. So you can see here, I'm running the sticks along the seam going horizontally, and then I go back through and I run sticks vertically also just to make everything very sturdy. Before I move on to painting, I'm just using some of this Dollar Tree spackling, and I like to use a craft stick to apply it because I think you can get a little more pressure and really get it in the holes. And there are 4 holes on this floating shelf, so I made sure that I had filled in all 4, and then I used the long side of the craft stick to scrape off the excess and make a nice flat surface. I wanted to keep the tones of my window frame pretty neutral because I do want to keep it up year round. I know I'll be hanging different wreaths from it and also setting different things on the shelf that could be for Christmas or fall or Valentine's Day. So that's why I decided to keep mine fairly neutral. I'm applying the Plaster Color by Waverly all over my window frames. It's not really a dry brush, but it's not a full coat either because I do like some of that natural wood to show through. And I did the same technique on the shelf as well. Then after my paint had dried, I measured my shelf to see where the center was. I put a little pencil mark there and added my hot glue. And then I just lined up that pencil mark with the seam between the 2 of the frames along the bottom of the window. Then just like before, I'm using craft sticks to reinforce the seam between the bottom of the window and that shelf. You could also use a staple gun. I just didn't have mine handy when I was making this. I love the farmhouse look, so I wanted my window and shelf to be a little more distressed. I'm using the Mineral Color by Waverly and dry brushing all over the surface of the whole window. I think this project would be really great to do as a group activity. I know some of you have told me in the comments of other videos that you like to get together with friends and family and do crafts together, and I think this would be a perfect group craft. It would only require a few things and everybody could customize it to whatever colors they like. Since I do want to hang a wreath from my window, I found these clear self-adhesive hooks at the Dollar Tree, and I decided to try it out on my window frame. The adhesive seems pretty sticky, and so far so good. The wreath that I have hanging from mine has stayed on, and the hook hasn't come off. Let me know in the comments if you used these hooks before and if they've held up for you. Another type of frame canvas they have at the Dollar Tree is usually in the photo frame section. They usually have these square pieces of wall art, and I like these because you can't find a square frame in the Crafter Square section. Now, the wood inside these frames is not real wood, it's kind of that particle board MDF, but that's okay, we can make it work. In addition to 4 of those, I also grabbed 4 of the 5x7 canvas frames, some thicker jute cord, a few of these mini clothespins that I already had in my stash, and a few of these cork sheets that you can also find at the Dollar Tree. After I had removed the canvas from all 8 of the frames, I got to work on painting and staining. I used some white chalk paint and I gave a medium coat to these MDF frames, and you can see because of the color that they are and the texture that they have, it really does look like distressed wood once you apply that paint. Since the 5x7 frames are made of real wood, I decided to use a baby wipe to apply the antique wax to all 4 of those frames. And after I had given them a good coat, I moved on to the craft sticks and I did the same technique where I used the baby wipe to apply the antique wax. I needed a backing piece for the smaller 5x7 frames. I took some regular corrugated cardboard from a package that I had got in the mail, and I cut it down to roughly the same width as the frame. Once I measured out the frame, I did go back through and I took about 1/4 of an inch off the length and the width just to make sure that it would fit behind the frame and you wouldn't see the cardboard showing through. After I had all the pieces cut for the frames, then I went back through with those cork sheets and I did the same thing. I just traced the cardboard onto the cork sheet, cut it out, and because these are self-adhesive, I was able to just peel the backing off and stick it to the cardboard. Before attaching the back to the frame, I took some of that thicker jute cord and I laid it out so that it was just a little bit wider than the backing itself. Then I wrapped it around. I left a little slack in the line and I attached it with some hot glue and some clear tape just to make sure that it was really held in place. I wanted the line a little slack so that I could either add a mini clothespin to clip a photo to it, or I could tuck a photo down behind the cord as well. I turned the square frame so that it became a diamond shape, and I centered the smaller frame in the middle. I used some hot glue to hold everything in place, and I repeated that with the other 4 frames as well. I took those craft sticks that I had stained earlier and I cut them down to 2.5-inch pieces. I got 2 pieces from each of the craft sticks, so now instead of 4 I have 8, which is what I need to attach all of the frames together. I started by laying 2 of the frames next to each other, and I used my ruler to make sure that the gap between the 2 frames was the same at the top and the bottom. And then because this ruler does have measurements going in the other direction, I was able to line that up so that I knew where I needed to put my hot glue. I laid my hot glue down and then laid the craft stick on top of it, and then I repeated the same thing on the bottom. Because there's measurements on that ruler, I was able to set my ruler down so I had a guide as to where I needed to put that craft stick. So I glued these 2 frames together and then I repeated the same thing on the other 2 frames. I laid out both sets of frames that I had glued together with the craft sticks, and then I used my remaining craft sticks to glue in the opposite direction. So essentially I just formed a big square with all 4 frames, but I'm actually going to hang it as a diamond shape. Now that all the frames are attached, I could start placing in photos and other little things. One of the pieces of wall art that I took off of the square frame had this really pretty piece of greenery on it, and I thought it would look really cute clipped into one of the frames. So I cut it out and then I used my little picker tool and I started pulling out some of the threads just so that it would have a frayed edge, and I used a mini clothespin to attach it to one of the frames. I also gathered up a few pieces of greenery that I had in my stash. I hot glued them together and I used a clothespin to clip it into one of the other frames. And then for the last 2 frames, I just tucked in 2 pictures of my dogs. I grabbed 2 of these 6x8 canvas frames from the Dollar Tree, some of the larger craft sticks, and also a bit of the nautical rope to create a really fun and easy lantern. I didn't want the staples showing on this frame, so I grabbed my wire cutters, which is usually the easiest way for me to remove the staples out of these. I think they actually make little tools to remove staples, but I don't have one. Let me know in the comments if you have one and if it works a little bit easier, because sometimes I do struggle a little with these wire cutters. Sometimes I have to get a screwdriver in there too. But I found it easier just to pull the staples out of the canvas and the wood all in one step, rather than cutting the canvas off and then going back through and removing the staples. I grabbed 14 of those craft sticks, and using my paper trimmer, I cut all of them down to 5 inches in length. To create the box for the lantern, I took one of the craft sticks and I hot glued it in the bottom corner of one frame, and then I just hot glued it to the bottom corner of the other frame. Then I took another craft stick and I hot glued it to the 2 top corners of the frame, and I repeated it on the other side. That way I had the base and the top established first before I needed to lay down my other sticks. I spaced out 5 sticks in between the top and the bottom just to give me a quick guide as to where I would need to place them. Anytime I have to space things out like this, when I'm gluing it down, I always go back and forth between the bottom and the top. So you can see I glued down the next to the last on the bottom, then I moved to the top and back and forth. That way, as I'm gluing things down, I can adjust the spacing as I need to make it a little more even. After all the sticks were glued in place on both sides, I got to work on painting my lantern. As much as I love neutral decor pieces, sometimes I really like something with some color, and I love this moss color by Waverly. I've heard from some of you that your Walmarts don't carry the Waverly paint anymore. Mine still does, so I actually bought extra of the colors that I really like, because I'm going to be really sad whenever my Walmart stops carrying this paint. After my paint had dried, I did go back through with a dry brush, and I dry brushed on some white paint just to give it that distressed look. I wanted my lantern to have some handles, so I cut 2 equal lengths of that nautical rope. I tied a knot in each end of the rope as close as I could to the end. The excess rope that was hanging off the end of the knot, I just trimmed as close as I could to the actual knot. I added some hot glue to the center, and then I held it up against the side of the lantern until the glue had cooled down. That way I knew it was set in place, and I repeated that on both sides with both handles. Before I get into the projects using the material from the canvas frame, if you like this video so far, please give it a big thumbs up. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and if you're on social media, I am on Instagram at GlueLaLa. Now let's get into the rest of the projects. The next time you're at Dollar Tree, keep an eye out for these larger wall stickers that they have. When you combine these with some of that canvas material, you can create a really simple wall hanging. I took one of the smaller pieces of the material and I cut all of the excess off. It was really easy to do this because there are crease lines where it wrapped around the frame. So I was able to cut right along those lines to get a nice even piece of canvas. I have these giant craft sticks that I got from Walmart, so I took 4 of them and I cut them down to be about a ½ an inch wider than my piece of canvas. I think after I had cut that canvas material down, it was about 6 inches, so I cut each of these sticks down to 6½ inches. You can paint or stain these sticks any color you'd like, but for my project, I decided to keep mine just the natural wood. I ran a bead of hot glue along the bottom of one of the sticks and I laid my canvas on top of it. Then I took another one of the sticks and I put a good amount of hot glue all over the surface, and I kind of sandwiched that canvas in between the 2 sticks. And then I repeated that on the bottom of the canvas as well. I took some ribbon from my stash. I added hot glue to the edges of both of the sides of the craft sticks, and then I added hot glue to the back side of the canvas and wrapped the ribbon around to the back. I repeated that on the top too to create a border in the center of each of the craft sticks. To make an interesting hanger for this wall hanging, I decided to take some jute cord. I glued it to one side of the canvas and I added some clear tape just to make it secure. Then I strung on 6 wooden beads and I hot glued the other side of the string to the other side of the canvas, so that way when I hung it up I could drop 3 of the beads down to one side and 3 to the other. I added a bunch of greenery to the top of my wall hanging, and I used one of those stickers from that sticker pack from the Dollar Tree that has a little, it looks like an aloe plant to me. I don't know, maybe it's some other kind of succulent. I stuck it in the bottom right hand corner, and then I used my Cricut to cut out a decal that said she believed she could, so she did. Now it's summer, so I'm in summer mode. That's why I decorated this with greenery and succulents. But I also think you should keep this in mind because I think these would make really cute Christmas presents. You could put a Christmas saying on there and some Christmas stickers. And of course you could use some Christmas greenery at the top. I grabbed a small glass jar out of my craft stash. This was an old candle that I had taken all of the wax out of. I took a piece of that canvas material, and because of that coating that's on the canvas, when you wrinkle it up and scrunch it up like this with your hands, it stays nice and wrinkled and it gives it a natural distressed look. Now for this candle holder, I decided to keep the natural part of the frame as the outside, if that makes any sense. So you can see I laid the jar down on top of the canvas on the coating side so that when I wrapped it up around the jar, you would see the natural material on the outside. Once I had the canvas wrapped up how I liked it, then I used a piece of this thicker jute cord and I just tied it around and cinched it and tied a simple bow. If there were any places on the canvas material where I felt like it needed to be flapped down or turned under or cinched up more, I just added a few dabs of hot glue and I was able to kind of mold it to how I liked it. After I had everything in place, I just took a few sprigs of greenery and placed it inside, and I think this is one of those pieces that could go either farmhouse or boho. I cut a piece of cardboard down to fit inside a piece of that material from the canvas that was 8 by 10. I glued it down using kind of like a wrapping technique. I didn't actually put any glue on the cardboard or the material. I ran the glue along the edges of the cardboard and I kind of folded the material over. Now for this project, I don't want this side of the canvas that has the coating to show. I want the material side to show. So when you're looking at it here, the cardboard is laying on the coating side. After I had 2 of the sides glued into place, I just cut off a little extra material so that it wouldn't be so bulky whenever I folded it down. And then I did the same thing again. I just ran a bead of hot glue and folded the material in towards the center. I wanted to create a pocket with that second piece of canvas material, so I laid my cardboard piece down on top of it so I could get an idea of how much of the excess I needed to cut off. I didn't technically need to cut off these side pieces to start, but it just made it a little easier to work with. And like I said, because I do want that linen side of the material to show, I had to make sure that when I was finishing off the pocket that I was folding in the seam side on that coating side. So you can see here, I just ran a bead of hot glue along one side of that material, and then that way it gave it a finished look on that pocket. And then I basically repeated the same process as I did whenever I covered the cardboard. I just hot glued one side and folded the flap over, cut a little extra material off, and then glued in both side pieces. I took a length of ribbon and I laid it across the center of that pocket, and I made sure that I only glued it on the back so that none of the hot glue seeped through the front. Once that ribbon was secure, I took a little bow that I had created out of the same ribbon, and I just hot glued it onto the front. The last step I needed to do for this pocket was to add some jute twine to the back to act as a hanger, and then I was able to tuck in a few pieces of flowers and greenery. Canvas material is perfect for creating little pennants for a garland. I started by taking a larger piece of the canvas material and I cut it down to 4 pieces that measured 4 inches by 3 3/4 inches. I laid one of the pieces down with the coating side up. I ran a bead of hot glue about a 1/2 inch from the top. Then I folded that side over and I kind of gave it a light press with my fingers. I ran another bead of hot glue right next to that jute twine that I had laid down, and then I folded it over to give it a finished edge. I'll zoom in so you can see the second one a little better. So again, this is the coating side that's facing up. I ran my bead of hot glue, laid my jute twine on top of it. I laid another bead of hot glue next to that jute twine, and then I just rolled that canvas material right over top of the jute twine and pressed it into the hot glue. After I had all 4 pieces of the material on the jute twine, I got to work on creating the pennant. You can see I lined both corners of the bottom piece of the material up and I squeezed in the middle, and because of that coating I could see where the center line was. I cut up with my scissors about a 1/2 inch, and then I went from one corner up to that center point. So I'll show you here again. I just pinched in the center and you can see my line there. I cut up about a 1/2 inch with my scissors, and then I just met from the corner up to the center again to create that pennant. And because I folded the top seam up towards that coating side, I'm going to be putting everything on the linen side of this canvas material. I found this really pretty green garland at my Dollar Tree recently. So I cut off 4 small pieces that would fit on each of the pennants. Then I also created 4 simple bows using some brown and cream colored buffalo plaid ribbon that I had in my stash. I glued down a piece of that greenery and then I glued the bow on top of it to make a really simple garland. Now this would be really easy to customize. You could add anything you wanted to the pennants. You could even make more pennants than I did. I just wanted a smaller garland. But I think this would be really cute if you maybe put the word welcome across the pennants. I think that would make a really cute garland too. Thanks for hanging out and crafting with me today. Let me know in the comments if you use these canvas frames for projects other than just regular painting. All right, everyone, have a great week, and I'll talk to you in the next one.